At 2 a.m., my CEO husband insisted on driving through a blizzard to pick up his ex-girlfriend. I didn't stop him. The next day, he brought her home. Our butler looked at them with disdain and said, "Madam withdrew all capital and filed for divorce last night. Your shares have been recalled, and you have been removed from this residence." 2 a.m. The winter storm lashed against the windows, the icy rain sounding like someone trying to break into the house from the outside. December in Greenwich, Connecticut, wasn't a gentle snowscape. It was a damp, bone-chilling cold that felt more menacing than any blizzard I'd ever experienced. The wind howled, carrying the distant sound of snowplows on the main road and casting pale, yellow light across the sprawling living room ceiling. I stood in the kitchen, holding a mug of warm water that had long since gone cold. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked with a dry, relentless rhythm, each sound a hammer against my temples. On the marble island, my phone's screen was still lit, displaying a severe weather alert for the entire tri-state area, urging residents to stay off the roads. The bathroom door opened. Michael emerged, wrapped in a dark gray bathrobe, his hair still damp. The familiar scent of his shower gel suddenly felt alien, intrusive. He opened his closet and selected a black cashmere overcoat, the one he wore for meetings with major investors. His movements were decisive, without a flicker of hesitation. "I know what you're about to do," I said, my voice so calm it startled even me. "Are you really going?" He turned, a flash of annoyance in his eyes, as if I'd asked a forbidden question. "She just landed at JFK. It's not right for her to be alone in this weather." I tightened my grip on the mug. "The roads are icy. You could call the company driver." He shook his head. "The driver has a family, young kids. Besides, I'll be faster on my own." I stared at him for a long moment, at the face of the man I had called my husband for 3 years. 3 years of cohabitation, 3 years of learning silence, of being understanding, of reminding myself that our marriage was a merger of dynasties, not a romance. But tonight, I had to speak. "Tonight is our wedding anniversary," I said slowly, each word dropping onto the cold stone floor. He faltered for a fraction of a second, a pause so brief that if you weren't watching closely, you would have missed it. Then he sighed, his voice edged with impatience. "I'll be back early tomorrow. Don't make a scene. Just don't make a scene." Those last 4 words, I'd heard them so many times. I managed a faint smile. "And what if I don't let you go?" He turned completely, his irritation no longer veiled. "Don't be so childish. She just flew back to the country. She doesn't know anyone, and it's the middle of the night. I'll pick her up and come straight back." I nodded. "Then go." He seemed surprised I'd conceded so easily. He studied me for another second, searching for signs of a tantrum or a hidden trick, but I had already turned away, placing the mug in the sink. My back was straight, my shoulders steady. He put on his coat, grabbed his car keys, and opened the door. A blast of frigid air swept into the living room, scattering a few papers on the coffee table. I stood motionless, watching his silhouette disappear into the elevator. When the metal doors slid shut with a final, hollow sound, I realized my hands were numb with cold. From the underground garage, the roar of an engine started and then faded into the distance. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down. The familiar black sedan sped out of the estate's gates, its red taillights a fading blur in the sleet before vanishing around a bend. 3 years of marriage. I had asked myself so many times, if the day came when he chose to go back to her, what would I do? Would I cry? Would I beg him to stay? Would I scream and demand answers? Tonight, I did none of those things. I didn't cry. I didn't ask. I didn't hold on. I returned to the living room and sank into the sofa. The space was so vast I could hear the echo of my own heartbeat. I picked up my phone. A new message had just arrived. "Catherine, is the 9 a.m. meeting with the private equity partners still on?" The sender was Leo, my personal assistant. To most people, I was just the wife of the CEO of Sterling Holdings, the real estate conglomerate. But Leo and a very select few knew I was also the founder of the investment fund that had quietly funneled hundreds of millions of dollars into that same conglomerate over the past 3 years. I typed quickly, "Yes." Prepare the documents as planned. After sending, I deleted the chat history, a force of habit. Michael had no idea I had another world. Just as I never asked him about the regular monthly wire transfers to a bank account in Miami, registered to a woman who was supposed to have vanished from his life long ago. I stood and walked upstairs. In the master bedroom, the king-sized bed was perfectly made. I pulled open the drawer of the nightstand and took out a thin file. The paper was slightly aged, its edges yellowed. The cover read, Post-Nuptial Agreement, Addendum B, 3 years ago. When I signed it, I never thought I would need it. It was my father-in-law who had given it to me. He had said only one thing, very quietly. Catherine, keep this, just in case. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it to the last page. The bolded text was still there, chillingly clear. With a red pen, I circled 2 clauses: engaging in a confirmed emotional or physical relationship with a former partner during the term of the marriage, and absence on a wedding anniversary for personal reasons. I closed the file. Outside, the storm raged on. The clock showed 2:47 a.m. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had saved a long time ago. The other end picked up almost instantly. Have you decided, Catherine? My voice was steady. Initiate the plan. Exactly as we prepared. A brief pause. All legal procedures will be finalized before sunrise. I ended the call. In the vast house, only the sound of the storm and the ticking clock remained. I made myself a cup of hot tea and sat in the darkness, waiting for dawn. I knew that when he returned, this would no longer be the door he had walked out of. And neither would this marriage. Just before dawn, the icy rain softened, but the cold clung to every window frame. I sat on the living room sofa, the tea long gone. The night had felt endless, but as the first gray light of morning filtered through the trees, I knew everything had already changed. Around 4 a.m., my phone vibrated. Not a call, just a short text. Catherine, the initial procedures are complete. As per the agreement, Michael's corporate assets have been temporarily frozen. I stared at the words for a long time, not out of hesitation, but because in that moment, I realized I wasn't trembling. For 3 years, I had been preparing for this day, longer than I had even admitted to myself. I rose and pulled back the curtains. The sky was a pale, bruised gray. This house, this sprawling mansion in a quiet, gated community, was once a place where I tried to build the warmth of a family. But from the moment he walked out that door at 2 a.m., it had reverted to its true nature, a cold, cavernous, and empty block of concrete. The sound of an engine grew closer. I didn't need to look at the clock to know he was back. The car stopped at the gate, its headlights sweeping across the manicured lawn. I didn't move. I remained seated, my back straight, my hands resting on my knees. The front door opened. The familiar sound of his footsteps echoed on the marble floor. He appeared in the foyer, his overcoat damp with melted snow, his hair a mess, his face etched with the fatigue of a long night. Behind him, a woman pulling a suitcase stopped short, her eyes darting nervously around the house. I looked at them, my composure surprising even myself. A deep voice spoke from beside the doorway. "Mr. Sterling, please stop right there." Michael turned. It was Arthur, the man who had been the butler of this house for over 20 years. He stood tall, his hands clasped, his expression unyieldingly stern. Michael frowned. "What is it, Arthur?" Arthur spoke slowly, enunciating every word. "As per the legally binding agreement, effective 3:10 a.m. this morning, you no longer have the right to access this residence, nor any vehicles or assets held jointly during the marriage. Please hand over the car keys." The air in the foyer froze. The woman behind him let out a small gasp, her hand tightening on her luggage. Michael stared at Arthur. Then his gaze shifted to me, as if he were only just now truly seeing me sitting there. "Catherine? What is this?" I stood and walked slowly toward him. My voice was quiet, but every word landed with cold precision. "You're asking me? Do you not remember what night it is?" His mouth opened, but no words came out. His expression shifted from shock to anger. "You're overreacting. I just went to pick up an old friend. You didn't have to bring lawyers into this." I looked directly into his eyes. "An old friend? You call a woman you loved for 7 years, a woman you almost married, an old friend, and leave your wife at home on your anniversary to go get her. Does that sound reasonable to you?" He turned to Arthur, his tone sharp. "Get out of my way. I'm talking to my wife." Arthur didn't budge. "My apologies, Mr. Sterling. I am following the madam's instructions." End quote. Hearing the word madam, a strange feeling washed over me, not triumph, not bitterness, just a cold confirmation that everything was different now. The woman behind him finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Catherine, I didn't know it was this serious. If I had known—" I turned to her. She was a little younger than me, her face lightly made up, her eyes tired from the overnight flight. "You don't need to explain anything to me. This is between my husband and me." End quote. Michael suddenly laughed. A dry, humorless sound. "Fine. You want to play this to the end, don't you? What do you think you'll gain from this?" I answered without hesitation. "I'm just taking back what's mine." He was silent for a few seconds, then pulled the car keys from his pocket and threw them onto the foyer table. The clatter of metal on stone was sharp and final. "Don't regret this, Catherine." I didn't reply. Arthur stepped forward, holding out his hand. Michael stared at him, then turned to the woman. "Let's go." They turned and walked out, pulling the suitcase behind them. When the door closed, the house fell into a terrifying silence. I stood there for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. I just felt as if an invisible weight that had been crushing my chest for 3 years had finally been lifted. My phone vibrated again. "Catherine, all subsidiary accounts are now under control. The board of directors will receive the notification before business hours." I texted back, "Good, prepare for this morning's meeting." When the sun was fully up, I went upstairs to change. I chose a simple, light gray power suit, no elaborate jewelry. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw that my eyes were different. They were no longer tired, no longer waiting. I walked out of the house. The car was already waiting. As the iron gates closed behind me, I knew I had just left an old role behind to step onto a completely different stage. The car headed toward downtown Manhattan. Ahead of me wasn't just a normal workday, but the start of a confrontation I had been quietly preparing for 3 years, and I knew this was only the beginning. The car stopped in front of the Sterling Holdings Tower just as the clock struck 7:30 a.m. The Manhattan sky was a heavy gray, the light muted as if filtered through frosted glass. I stepped out. The early morning wind was cold but bracing. In that moment, I understood why I hadn't hesitated. It wasn't out of revenge. It was because I had prepared long enough to no longer be afraid. The elevator went straight to the 27th floor, the executive level. The mirrored doors reflected my calm, composed face. For the past 3 years, I had grown accustomed to entering this building through the back, accompanying Michael, sitting quietly at dinners, smiling just enough, saying just enough. Today, I walked straight through the main lobby. The receptionist stood up abruptly. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling." I nodded. "Please prepare the main conference room. The board meeting will begin at 8 a.m. sharp." The young woman hesitated. "Of course. Should I inform Mr. Sterling?" I looked her straight in the eye. "That won't be necessary." The doors to the conference room were open. The long mahogany table, the leather chairs neatly arranged, the large screen on the wall in standby mode. I placed my briefcase at the seat to the right of the chairman's chair, pulled it out, and sat down. The room was empty, filled only with the low hum of the air conditioning. I took a deep breath. It felt like standing at a major crossroads. But this wasn't the first difficult decision I'd had to make. One by one, they arrived. The CFO, the head of HR, the chief legal counsel, a few members of the board. I saw curious glances, probing stares, and some unconcealed annoyance. They were used to seeing me beside Michael, not in this position. At exactly 8 a.m., the door swung open. Michael walked in. He wore a dark suit, his tie perfectly knotted, but the dark circles under his eyes betrayed a sleepless night. He saw me, His expression darkened, and he moved to take his customary seat at the head of the table. I spoke first. "Michael, that seat is no longer appropriate for you today." The room fell silent. He froze for a second, then gave a short, bitter laugh. "Catherine, what kind of game are you playing here?" I clicked a remote. The screen lit up, displaying a legal document with a clear, official seal. "According to the clauses that became effective at 3 a.m. this morning, you are temporarily suspended from your executive duties at this company, pending a full board review of all related financial transactions." He slammed his hand on the table. "This is absurd. This is my company." A calm, older voice spoke from the end of the table. "It's a public corporation, Michael." The speaker was Mr. Caldwell, the longest-serving board member. I gave him a subtle nod of thanks. Michael turned on him, his face flushing. "You're siding with her?" Mr. Caldwell sighed. "I'm siding with the company." I stood up. "Today's meeting has 3 agenda items. First, to announce the temporary change in executive leadership. Second, to review all major expenditures from the last 6 months. And third, to outline a stability plan for the worst-case scenario." Michael scoffed. "You think you understand this company better than I do?" I gestured to the figures now displayed on the screen. "At the very least, I understand these numbers." I pointed to a prominent red column. $32 million spent on market consulting in the southern region over 3 months. The receiving entity was a company founded less than a year ago. There are no detailed reports, no deliverables. "Could you please explain that, Michael?" He was silent for a beat, then said quickly, "It was a long-term strategic play. You wouldn't understand." I cut him off. "I don't need to understand the strategy. I just need to understand where the money is going." The CFO cleared his throat quietly. "That particular file is still awaiting completion." The tension in the room thickened. I pressed on, giving them no time to recover. "And this item? $20 million wired to a personal account and then withdrawn in cash over 2 days. The reason cited was..." Michael shot to his feet. "That's enough, Catherine. You're deliberately trying to slander me in front of everyone." I didn't raise my voice. "If there's nothing to hide, what are you afraid of an audit for?" Another board member spoke, his tone cautious. "Michael, under the circumstances, cooperation would be best." End quote. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning each face. The people who once nodded at his every command now avoided his gaze. He turned back to me, his voice low. "What do you want?" I answered slowly. "I want this company to survive." That statement silenced the room. I knew I had hit the mark. Sterling Holdings was not as strong as it appeared. Projects were overextended, cash flow was tight, and market confidence was wavering. Michael had been using his charisma and old connections to patch the holes, but I had seen the systemic risk for a long time. The meeting lasted over 2 hours. Numbers were scrutinized. Questions were relentless. Michael went from defiant to silent. By the time it ended, 4 of the 7 board members had voted to temporarily grant me executive authority during the review period. Michael followed me into the hallway. "Catherine, you're creating chaos." I stopped. "No, I'm correcting a mistake." He gritted his teeth. "You think you've won?" I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw something like bewilderment in his eyes. "I'm not playing to win against you, Michael. I'm playing not to lose myself." He said nothing more. I turned and walked away, the sound of my heels echoing on the cold marble floor. Inside the elevator, I leaned against the cool glass. My hand was trembling slightly, but only for a moment. I knew the real fight hadn't even started. Today was just the opening shot. My phone buzzed, a text from Leo. "Catherine, the legal team says there are irregularities in an old deal, possibly involving an acquaintance of Michael's." I typed back, "Keep it confidential. Prepare the file." The elevator reached the ground floor. As I stepped outside, the wind hit my face. In the gray sky, the clouds were beginning to part, revealing a sliver of weak light. I knew that behind those numbers lay a much bigger secret, and soon it would come out. Leaving the Sterling Holdings Tower, I didn't go straight home. I told the driver to take a scenic route along the Hudson. The sky had brightened, but a chill still hung over the water. I needed a few minutes to organize my thoughts. The meeting had gone as planned, but Michael's silence at the end unsettled me. He wasn't one to give up easily. His silence meant he was planning something else. My phone rang again. Catherine, the legal department just reported that access to several old files in the physical archives was switched to Michael's private credentials late last night. I closed my eyes for a moment. Which files? Leo's voice dropped. Related to the Sunridge property deal 3 years ago. They said they need the CEO's direct signature to open them now. I opened my eyes, staring at the misty river. Sunridge. I'd heard that name in hushed conversations between Michael and his partners. 3 years ago, it was the deal that pulled Sterling Holdings back from the brink, but it was also the deal that made me first question the perfect numbers on the financial reports. I spoke slowly. Leave them. Don't touch anything. Just log every access attempt for me. Hanging up, I leaned back in my seat. Memories of 3 years ago flooded back. I was new to the family then, unaccustomed to the life of a corporate dynasty. Michael was always out late. I stayed home, caring for his ailing father, taking care of what he called the trivial things. I had believed him. I had chosen to believe him. The car stopped at the gates of the estate. As I walked inside, the emptiness of the house amplified the sound of my footsteps. Arthur was waiting in the living room. "Madam, a few people from the company came by, but I told them you weren't back yet." "You did the right thing, Arthur." I went up to the small study on the second floor, a room I rarely used. Today, it was my command center. I opened the safe and took out another file, much thicker than the divorce papers. The cover had only a small symbol, no project name, no date. I had kept it for 2 years, never opening it since the day I compiled it. I sat down and opened the file. Inside were copies of financial statements, purchase agreements, and appraisal reports. Numbers were highlighted in red, with handwritten notes in the margins. Back then, I didn't have enough evidence to prove anything, only a deep sense of unease. The doorbell rang. It was 9:15 p.m. Arthur knocked on the study door. "Madam, Mr. Sterling is here." I closed the file. "Show him into the living room." Michael walked in, his anger from the morning gone. His face was calmer, almost weary. He sat on the sofa across from me, silent for a long moment before speaking. "We need to talk." End quote. I nodded. "I agree." He leaned back. "You want control of the company. I get it. But you're moving too fast. Not everyone on that board is on your side." I looked him straight in the eye. "I don't need them on my side. I need them on the side of the truth." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "What truth?" I placed the Sunridge file on the table. "The truth about Sunridge." His expression shifted, just for a second, but I saw it clearly. That project was closed years ago. "It's something the Backtakens and Overgenses." I opened a page and pushed it toward him. The initial appraisal was $450 million. The final purchase price was $630 million. Where did the difference go? He said nothing. I continued. The appraisal company was a small firm based out of Florida. 3 months after the deal, it dissolved. But just before dissolving, it transferred a large sum to the personal account of someone very familiar. He looked at me, his eyes turning cold. "You've been investigating me." "It's Quietet. I've been protecting the company," I replied instantly. He stood and paced the room. "You don't understand. Sterling was on the verge of collapse. Without Sunridge, the company would have gone under. I did what had to be done." I stood up too. "Was it necessary, or was it just easy?" He spun around. "You think I wanted that? You think I enjoy taking those kinds of risks?" My voice dropped. "I think you got used to no one daring to ask you that question. And Kreese now." The tension between us was palpable. He took a deep breath, his voice lower. "What's your next move?" I answered clearly. "I'm bringing in an independent forensic accounting firm. Every major project from the last 3 years will be audited." He smirked. "You do that, and you'll be shooting yourself in the foot. The stock will plummet, partners will back out. Who's going to take responsibility for that?" "If we don't do this," I said, That day will come anyway. It will just be later, and it will be more painful. He stared at me for a long time, his eyes a mixture of anger and helplessness. Are you really giving me no way out? I shook my head. The way out is to admit your mistakes and fix them, not to hide them. He looked down, clenching his fists. You have no idea what I've been carrying. My voice softened, but not my resolve. I know, but I also know what I've been carrying for the past 3 years. He said nothing more. After a moment, he turned and walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused. You'll regret this, Catherine. Maybe, I replied. But I'd rather regret doing the right thing than continue living a lie I'm fully aware of. The door closed. I sank back into my chair and let out a long breath. This confrontation had reached the core of the problem. Sunridge wasn't just a project. It was the beginning of a chain of bad choices Michael had never wanted to face. My phone vibrated again. Catherine, HR reports that several department heads just had a private meeting with Michael. There are signs they plan to delay the audit. I texted back, let them. Every delay leaves another trail. I stood and opened the window. The cold air rushed in, but this time it felt clarifying. I knew the doors that were locked today would force someone to try and break them down, and when they did, the truth would walk out on its own. The afternoon descended slowly, the gray sky like a heavy lid on the city. I sat in the second-floor study, the yellow lamplight falling on the Sunridge file. The numbers on the page were silent, but I knew that behind them were currents that never stood still. Money doesn't lie. People just lack the patience to follow its trail. My phone buzzed. Catherine, the internal accounting team just sent me a copy of the Sunridge intermediary account statements. There are some very strange circular transfers. Send them over now, I said into the phone, and don't expose your source. Minutes later, the email arrived. I opened it and zoomed in. 3 years ago, a series of transfers went from Sterling Holdings to the appraisal firm, then were split and funneled through 2 shell corporations, finally landing in a personal account in Miami. The account holder's name was painfully familiar. I had seen it on expense reports for client entertainment, on receipts for expensive gifts, on the faint scent of a strange perfume that had once lingered on Michael's coat. I leaned back and closed my eyes. So that was it. No more guessing. The truth now had a face. There was a soft knock on the door. Leo entered, his expression tense. Catherine, the administrative office just confirmed it. Physical access to the archives has been locked down. They say it requires Michael's direct signature. I smiled faintly. He's starting. Leo hesitated. What do we do now? Nothing, I said, standing up. We wait. Leo looked confused. I explained, my voice calm. When someone locks a door, it means there's something inside they're afraid of others seeing. The harder they lock it, the more they reveal. That evening, I didn't go home. I stayed at the office, ordering in a simple meal and drinking black coffee. Outside the window, the city lights came on, a river of traffic flowing like arteries. I opened my laptop and logged into an old, encrypted account. It was my communication channel with the independent auditing firm I had set up long ago, right after signing the postnup. I sent a short email, attaching the bank statements. Minutes later, a reply came. We have the file. We'll need 3 days for a preliminary review. 3 days. I exhaled. Enough time for everything to start shaking. Around 9 p.m., my phone rang. Michael's name on the screen. I watched it for a moment, then answered. His voice was low and hoarse. Where are you? At the office. A pause. Come home. We need to sort this out. There's nothing left to sort out, I said slowly. He gave a weak, tired laugh. You think freezing a few accounts solves everything? You don't understand the full picture. I don't need the full picture, I replied. I just need enough not to be fooled anymore. End quote. He was silent for a few seconds. Catherine, I'm being serious. Do you still consider me your husband? If he had asked that 3 years ago, it might have softened me. Not anymore. I used to. But you chose to disrespect that. I hung up before he could say more. My hand was steady. I knew this call wasn't about reconciliation. It was a probe. Around 10 p.m., Leo returned with a paper file. "Catherine, I got a friend in IT. They hadn't wiped the access logs yet. We have proof Michael entered the digital archives last night and downloaded several old files." I flipped through the pages. The file names were clear: Sunridge Appraisal Final, PDF. My heart beat a little faster. When did he download them? Leo pointed to the timestamp. 3:20 a.m. 3:20 a.m. I remembered it perfectly. That was moments after Arthur had read the clause revoking his access to the house. While still standing in the foyer, Michael was already planning his escape route. A man like him never allowed himself to be left with nothing. "Good," I said. "Save everything. Back it up in 3 separate locations." Leo nodded, but he still looked worried. "Catherine, what if he leaks damaging information first?" I looked out the window. Then we get there one step ahead of him. I slept on the office sofa that night, a fitful sleep. But when I woke, my mind was crystal clear. By 6 a.m., I was in a small conference room. Leo and the chief legal counsel sat across from me, their faces grave. The lawyer spoke first. "Catherine, if we activate the independent audit, Michael could countersue, claiming you're abusing your power." I nodded. "I'm aware. We'll need you to sign a waiver accepting full liability." I took the pen and signed without hesitation. "I accept." At 9 a.m., the email from the auditing firm arrived. The subject was short: Initial Findings. I opened it. The words were cold, but each one landed like a hammer blow. Valuation discrepancy of at least $180 million. Evidence of circular money transfers consistent with laundering. Significant legal exposure. I closed the laptop and stood up. Prepare to notify the board. Emergency meeting in 1 hour. The meeting was tense. Some members argued we needed more time. I didn't debate. I simply presented the numbers, citing the evidence, letting the documents speak for themselves. By the end, 7 out of 11 board members agreed to authorize turning the files over to the authorities if further investigation confirmed the findings. Leaving the meeting, I saw Michael waiting in the hallway. He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot. "Are you trying to send me to prison, Catherine?" I stopped and looked him in the eye. "You walked down that path on your own a long time ago." He took a step closer. "You think you're so clean? What if I drag you down with me?" I cut him off. "If you have evidence, use it. I won't stop you." He froze. He probably hadn't expected that response. In that instant, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of a truth he could no longer control. He turned to leave. "You will regret this." I didn't answer. I knew that from now on, his threats were just the echoes of a power he was rapidly losing. That afternoon, rumors began to circulate through the company. Employees whispered, their gazes a mix of curiosity and apprehension. I walked through the floors, office by office, not hiding. I knew trust wasn't built with words, but by standing firm. As evening fell, I received a text from an unknown number. Just one short sentence. "Catherine, if you want the full truth about Sunridge, I have what you need. It is quite." I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed back, "Where?" The 3 dots appeared, then vanished. "Tomorrow. The old coffee shop on Bleecker Street." I locked my phone, my heart beating slow and steady. I knew the next door was about to open, and behind it lay not just the crimes of one project, but the root of every wrong choice in this marriage and this company. The next morning, New York City awoke under a thin layer of fog. I left the office earlier than usual, telling the driver to stop at the end of Bleecker Street. The old coffee shop was tucked under the canopy of an ancient oak tree, its sign faded, its windows misted over. This was where Michael and I had sat for hours in the early days, when promises were easy and trust was still whole. I hadn't chosen this place, but the sender had, as if to remind me that the past always finds a way back. I went inside and chose a table by the window. Black coffee, no sugar. I didn't want anything sweet to cloud my judgment. The clock read 8:10 a.m. I wasn't in a hurry. If the person who contacted me truly had something to give, they wouldn't keep me waiting long. 9 minutes later, the door opened. A man entered, tall, thin, in a dark coat, a baseball cap pulled low. He scanned the room, his eyes stopping when they met mine. He pulled out the chair across from me and took off the cap. I recognized him. "Mark, isn't it?" He gave a wry smile. "You remember me. How could I forget?" Mark had been the associate project manager at Sterling Holdings, the one who handled the Sunridge file 3 years ago. Not long after the deal closed, he resigned, disappearing from all company events. At the time, Michael had dismissed it with a single sentence: "Not a culture fit." I looked directly at him. "You texted me. You said you had something I needed." Mark didn't answer right away. He ordered a hot tea, waited for the server to leave, then spoke. "You're digging into Sunridge. Michael must have figured it out." I nodded. "I want the truth." Mark sighed, lacing his fingers together. "The truth isn't pretty, Catherine. And it's not just Michael in it." I didn't interrupt. I was ready. Mark opened his briefcase, took out a small USB drive, and placed it on the table. On here are audio recordings of the internal meetings before and after the Sunridge deal was signed. Emails, too, and the original appraisal file. I looked at the drive but didn't touch it yet. "Why did you keep this?" Mark's smile was sad. "Because I was the one who signed the final appraisal report, and because I was forced to sign it." The atmosphere between us grew heavy. Mark began to speak, his voice flat, unembellished. 3 years ago, Sterling Holdings was in dire straits. Projects were stalled, banks were calling in loans. Sunridge appeared like a life raft, but the property value was inflated with fabricated numbers. Mark had protested. Michael hadn't threatened him, just asked him one question: "Do you want this company to live or die?" "Where did the excess money go?" I asked. Mark looked at me for a long time. Part of it went back to cover cash flow gaps. The rest passed through the hands of someone you know very well. I already knew the answer, but I asked anyway. "Who?" "The woman Michael went to pick up the other night," Mark said quietly. I closed my eyes for a second. The final puzzle piece clicked into place. She wasn't just an old memory, she was a key player. "She owns a consulting firm," Mark continued. "That firm received the funds and then rerouted them. I have the statements." I opened my eyes. "Why are you giving this to me now?" Mark took a sip of tea. "Because I don't want my son to grow up and read in the news that his father was part of a crime I tried to stop from the beginning." I nodded. "Thank you, Mark." He pushed the USB drive toward me. "Be careful, Catherine. Once you touch this, there's no going back." "I passed the point of no return that night," I said, taking the drive. We left the cafe without another word. I got in the car and told the driver to head straight back to the office. On the way, my phone vibrated nonstop with texts and missed calls. I ignored them. I needed silence to plan my next steps. Back at the office, I locked the door and plugged the drive into my computer. The files opened. Familiar voices filled the quiet room. Michael's deep, confident tone, talking about being flexible with the numbers. Sarah's light, sharp voice, discussing consulting fees. I listened to every word, not to feel the pain, but to be certain. 30 minutes later, I called Leo and the chief legal counsel into my office. I placed the USB on the table. "Let's begin." The lawyer opened a file, his face paling. "Catherine, this is enough to—" "I know what it's enough for," I cut him off. "My only question is, are you prepared to act on it?" He took a deep breath. "Yes." That afternoon, an internal memo was sent out. Announcement of independent forensic audit, scope expanded. Simultaneously, I sent copies of the evidence to my personal attorney. I didn't release it publicly. Not yet. I was waiting for a reaction. I didn't have to wait long. That evening, Michael called. "Let's meet." "Where?" I asked. "The old restaurant near the park. Now." I arrived to find him already there, sitting alone. A glass of scotch sat untouched in front of him. The dim light cast long shadows on his face, making him look more exhausted than I had ever seen him. He got straight to the point. "You met with Mark." I didn't deny it. "I did." He gripped his glass. "How far are you planning to take this?" "As far as necessary," I said. He scoffed. You think dragging her into this will clarify anything? You have no idea what she's done for me. I don't care what she's done for you, I replied. I only care what she's done to the company. He was silent for a long time. Then, in a low voice, he asked, "If I admit I was wrong, will you stop?" I had been waiting for that question. I asked one of my own. Are you admitting you were wrong because you're scared, or because you understand? He couldn't answer. I stood up. When you can answer that, we can talk again. I left. Outside, the wind was picking up, sending ripples across the pond in the park. I knew Michael wouldn't sleep tonight, and I knew the next counterattack would come very soon. Back at my office, I received a text from an unknown number. "Catherine, she knows you have proof. She won't sit back and do nothing." I stared at the screen, my heart calm. I texted back, "Neither will I." I turned off my phone. In this game, the person who knew too much was always the most dangerous, and from this moment on, I was no longer the one on the defensive. The next morning, I woke up early, not from insomnia, but from the vigilance that had become second nature. The city was still sleepy, but my phone was not. A barrage of notifications lit up the screen: messages from internal company groups, texts from unknown numbers, and links to online news articles. I opened one. The headline hit me like a physical blow: "Turmoil at Sterling Holdings as Family Power Struggle Erupts." The article didn't name me, but every detail was a thinly veiled accusation. An ambitious wife abusing her power, a heavy-handed interference in corporate operations, forcing her husband into a difficult position. I read to the end, a small, cold smile on my lips. It was the familiar style of a writer known for corporate PR hits. Leo called, his voice urgent. "Catherine, they've started a media campaign. There's more than one article." "I see that," I said calmly. "Is it Michael?" Leo hesitated. "Not directly, but our PR team is picking up chatter that suggests it's his directive." I stepped out onto my office balcony, taking in the cold air. Good. Just as I expected. Less than an hour later, my phone rang again. An internal line. The chief legal counsel spoke quickly. "Catherine, we just received an anonymous complaint filed with the board. It alleges that you are using your position as a major shareholder to manipulate the audit and cover up your own financial misconduct. It's merited ire as meted." I was silent for a second. What did they send with it? A few doctored screenshots of emails and a bank statement for an account in the name of a Catherine Sterling. I laughed, a short, sharp sound. "A Catherine Sterling? Not me?" The lawyer exhaled. "It's clearly a setup." I turned back to my desk and opened my laptop. I had been waiting for this since last night's warning text. A man like Michael, when cornered, wouldn't retreat quietly. He would try to drag me down with him, or at least make me flinch. "Call an emergency board meeting," I said. 1 hour. The meeting was suffocating. Suspicious glances, quick whispers, uncertain nods. When the lawyer presented the anonymous complaint, one board member spoke up. "Catherine, we need an explanation." I stood. "I will provide one. But first, allow me to show you something." I clicked the remote. The screen displayed a side-by-side comparison of 2 bank accounts. One belonged to a woman with my name in the Midwest. The other was mine. The social security numbers, addresses, and transaction histories were completely different. I then opened the original email files, showing the metadata and pointing out every trace of digital alteration. The room fell silent. I continued, my voice even. Whoever did this was in a hurry. So much of a hurry they forgot that digital footprints don't disappear just because you crop a screenshot. "I know." Another member asked, "So who do you believe is behind this?" I didn't answer directly. I don't need to say it. The truth will find the responsible party on its own. The meeting ended in a state of suspension. I knew that even though I'd proven the complaint was fake, a seed of doubt had been planted. That was the purpose of a smear campaign, not to win, but to destabilize. Leaving the room, I saw Michael in the hallway. He didn't avoid me, nor did he approach. His expression was strangely calm. "You handled that quickly," he said. "You acted just as quickly," I replied. He smirked. "It's a game. You chose the rules, so I chose a different strategy. I looked at him. And you think that strategy will save you? He took a step closer. No, but it will ensure you don't walk away from this as clean as you think you are. I lowered my voice. I never thought I was clean, Michael. I just know I'm not wrong. He laughed and turned to leave. Let's see who lasts longer. At noon, I received a call from an unknown number. The woman's voice was familiar. Catherine? Can we meet and talk? I knew who it was. What do you want to talk about, Sarah? She gave a light laugh. About the misunderstandings between you and Michael. I think you'll want to hear this. I thought for a second. Fine. 3 p.m. The tea lounge on Park Avenue. The meeting was punctual. Sarah appeared impeccably dressed, her makeup subtle, her eyes confident. She sat down, looking at me as if we were old friends. You're very formidable, Catherine, she began, but you're going too far. Too far from what? I asked. She smiled, too far from a marriage that could still be saved. I set my teacup down. You think I still care about that? She tilted her head. You care about the company, but do you know who saved this company? I looked her straight in the eye. I know who is dragging it down. The smile on her lips froze. You think the little evidence you have is enough to push me out? No, I replied, but it's enough for the truth to come out. She leaned back in her chair. You don't understand. If it weren't for me, Sterling Holdings would have gone bankrupt 3 years ago. Michael just did what I told him to do. I mentally recorded every word of that sentence. I stood up. Thank you for the confirmation. She looked stunned. Catherine. I didn't look back. I left the lounge, my heart beating fast but my mind clear. She had made a fatal mistake. In her arrogance, she had just confessed. That evening, I received the auditor's preliminary report. It confirmed systemic financial misconduct involving multiple individuals, including a third-party entity. I immediately forwarded a copy to my lawyer. As night fell, I sat alone in my office. The city lights cast a web of shadows on the ceiling. I knew that from this day forward, the fight was no longer just between me and Michael. It had become bigger, more complex, and far more dangerous. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. You met with her. I didn't reply. Another text followed immediately. Stop this, Catherine, before it gets out of your control. I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed a single line. You're the one who has lost control. I put the phone down. Outside, the city hummed with life, but I knew a real storm was gathering, and this time it would sweep away everyone who had grown comfortable living in the shadows. That night, I stayed at the office until the early morning hours, not because of work, but because I needed the space to think. The glass walls reflected my own image, tired but alert, like someone accustomed to standing in a storm. Around 1 a.m., my lawyer called. Catherine, the auditors sent more documents. There's an unusual cash flow that was cycled through 3 intermediary companies before returning to Sterling Holdings as consulting fees. I closed my eyes for a second. What are the company names? He read one slowly. Aura Consulting. I gave a small, bitter laugh. Aura. A name that sounded so harmless, but I knew who was behind it. Tomorrow, I said, file a motion to freeze Aura Consulting's assets. Grounds. Suspicion of money laundering and collusion to defraud a public corporation. My lawyer hesitated. Catherine, this will cut very deep. They might retaliate even more fiercely. I've been waiting for that, I said, my voice firm. Just as dawn broke, I left the office. The city in the early morning had a deceptive calm. People hurried to work, coffee shops steamed, no one aware of the tremors shaking a major corporation from within. As I walked into the house, I saw Michael sitting in the living room. His tie was loosened, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He looked up when he saw me. You didn't come home all night. I hung up my purse, my voice even. Neither did you. He stood up. Catherine, I'm not joking anymore. You're pushing this too far. How many times have you said that? I turned to face him. He clenched his fists. You think a few words from her are proof? You think you have the full story? I walked closer. At least I know what I'm up against. He gave a forced laugh. You have no idea. She's not as simple as you think. I never underestimated her, I replied. That's precisely why I've taken these steps. Michael fell silent, his eyes flickering as if weighing a difficult confession. Finally, he sighed. Catherine, if this goes public, it won't just be me. A lot of people will be dragged down with me. Innocent people. I spoke slowly. Innocent people were dragged into this a long time ago, Michael. They just weren't seen. At noon, the board convened an emergency session. News of the motion to freeze Aura Consulting's assets had spread faster than I anticipated. Some shareholders were getting nervous. The question on everyone's mind was, who was behind Aura, and how deep were its ties to Sterling? When it was my turn to speak, I stood without notes. Aura Consulting is an intermediary firm. Its purpose was not to provide advice, but to legitimize cash flow. The contracts it signed with Sterling were intentionally vague, valued at abnormally high rates, and produced no corresponding deliverables. A board member asked, "Do you have proof?" I nodded. Yes, and I submitted all of it to the SEC this morning. A murmur went through the room. Michael stared at me, his eyes a mixture of fury and defeat. The meeting ended in a heavy silence. I knew that from this moment there was no turning back. That afternoon, I received a call from her. Her voice was no longer light and airy. Catherine, you're playing a very dangerous game. So are you, I replied. She laughed coldly. You think freezing a few accounts is the end of it? Do you have any idea who is really behind Aura? I'm waiting for you to tell me, I said. The line was silent for a few seconds. If you continue, the first person to lose everything won't be me. Who will it be? I asked. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. Michael. I gripped the phone tightly. He chose this path himself. She laughed. You really are ruthless. No, I replied. I'm just no longer willing to sacrifice myself to cover up someone else's mistakes. The call ended. I sat in my office, staring into space. For the first time in all these days, a genuine wave of exhaustion washed over me, not from fear, but from the brutal clarity of the unfolding truth. That evening, Leo met me with another file. Catherine, there's one more thing. A former employee from Aura Consulting wants to meet you. He says he has critical evidence. I looked up. Where? He's terrified, Leo said. He wants to meet in a public place. We arranged to meet at a small diner near Grand Central Station. The man arrived early, looking nervous and furtive. When he saw me, he flinched. I don't want to be involved anymore, he said immediately. But I can't stand by while they try to pin this all on someone else. What do you have? I asked. He pulled out an old USB drive. On here are emails and recorded internal meetings from Aura. It includes the name of the person who ordered the money transfers. I looked him in the eye. You understand that by giving this to me, you can't go back to your old life. He gave a sad smile. My old life was over the day I signed those contracts. I took the USB. Thank you. I will protect you to the best of my ability. On the way back, it started to rain, the drops hitting the car window with a cold, steady rhythm. I knew that tiny USB drive could be the final piece of the puzzle, but I also knew that once it was put in place, the entire picture would collapse. When I got home, Michael was sitting in the dark. He spoke as I entered. How far are you going to take this? I stopped. Until it's over. He laughed bitterly. Over according to you, or over according to the law? If there's a difference, I replied, it's because of what you did. He bowed his head. I have no way out. Within heaven because Juan Rapindo. I looked at him for a long time. You have one way. Face the truth. He didn't answer. The silence stretched on, heavy as an unspoken confession. That night, I opened the USB. File after file appeared on the screen. Michael's name appeared far more often than I had expected, not as someone being manipulated, but as an active decision-maker. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The question in my mind was no longer whether I should continue, but a simple, firm thought. Everything must be returned to its rightful place. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and I knew the dawn after this storm would be anything but peaceful. The next morning, I woke with a sense of heaviness, not from lack of sleep, but because my mind had been racing all night. The files from the USB were seared into my memory. I knew that with a single click, everything would detonate. I arrived at the office early. The hallways were still empty, the sound of my footsteps echoing. The moment I sat down, I received a text from my lawyer. "Catherine, we've done a preliminary review of the new data. It's highly credible. If we submit all of this, the DOJ will launch a criminal investigation immediately." I typed back, "Prepare the file, but don't send it yet." He replied, "What are you waiting for?" I looked out the window, for the person who should to step into the light themselves. Less than 10 minutes later, my assistant informed me that Michael wanted to see me. I nodded. He walked into my office, looking even more exhausted than the night before. His eyes avoided mine for a moment before he sat down. "I know you have more evidence," he said first. I didn't deny it. "How do you know?" He gave a wry smile. "She called me, said someone on her team betrayed her." I nodded. It was only a matter of time. "I know they're one." He looked up at me. "What do you want, Catherine?" "I want you to tell the truth," I said slowly. He was silent. The air between us was thick. I could hear the low hum of the HVAC system like an invisible countdown. Finally, he exhaled. "It's true. I knew everything. From the beginning." I clenched my hands under the desk. "Then why did you let it go this far?" He gave a pained laugh. "Because at the time, I thought I had no other choice. The company was about to go bankrupt. The banks were closing in. The shareholders were panicking. She presented a solution, and I took it." I looked him straight in the eye. "You call fraud and embezzling company funds a solution?" He looked down. "I called it survival." I stood and walked to the front of my desk. "Michael, do you know the price of that survival?" He looked up. "What?" I spoke each word clearly. "The collapse of trust, of honor, of yourself, versus Downing Free." He was silent for a long time, then asked in a hoarse voice, "If I turn myself in, will you stop this?" I didn't answer right away. "That's not up to me anymore." He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "I knew you were never one to make deals." Just then, my office door flew open. My assistant looked panicked. "Catherine, there are agents from the SEC here. They want to speak with you and Mr. Sterling immediately." Michael shot to his feet. "So soon?" I looked at him. The truth doesn't like to wait. 2 agents entered and presented their credentials. The senior agent spoke. "We've received a whistleblower complaint with supporting documents related to Sterling Holdings. We need Mr. Sterling and Mrs. Sterling to cooperate with our inquiry." Michael turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Catherine." I gave a slight nod. "Just tell them the truth, Michael." The interviews lasted for hours. I clearly explained my role, providing the documents I had prepared. When they asked about Aura Consulting, I gave them all the data from the USB, without hiding or embellishing anything. Michael was taken to a separate room. I don't know what he said, only that when he returned, his shoulders were slumped, as if he were carrying a physical weight. Late in the afternoon, they concluded their initial inquiry. Before leaving, the agent looked at me. "Mrs. Sterling, thank you for your cooperation. We will continue our investigation to clarify the responsibilities of all individuals involved." I nodded. "I only hope the truth is respected." After they left, a deep silence fell over the office. Michael remained seated, saying nothing. I began to gather my papers, preparing to leave. He spoke, his voice quiet. "Do you hate me?" I paused. "I used to." He looked at me. "And now?" I sighed. "Now I just feel regret. Regret for the man you could have been, but chose not to be." He closed his eyes, his shoulders trembling. "I've lost everything." "No," I said softly. "You still have one thing left: responsibility." That evening, the news began to leak. Though there was no official statement, Wall Street could smell the volatility. Sterling Holdings stock fluctuated wildly. My phone rang off the hook. Leo called. "Catherine, everyone is panicking. Some are suggesting you make a public statement to calm the nerves. 10,000 in his very buddy 5. Schedule an internal town hall for all employees, I replied. Tomorrow morning, night fell. I sat alone in the vast, empty house, with only the dim light from my desk lamp. I opened an old photo album from when the company was on the rise, when Michael was smiling confidently for the cameras. I whispered, as if to myself, if only you had stopped sooner. The next morning, the conference hall was packed. I stood before the company's leadership and employees, my voice calm but firm. Sterling Holdings is going through a difficult time, but we will not hide. We will face this. The company will cooperate fully with the authorities while ensuring the rights of our employees are protected. Someone from the crowd asked, "What about Mr. Sterling?" "He will be held accountable under the law," I answered. "This company will not shield anyone from the consequences of their actions." The room was silent. I knew this decision would frighten some, but it would reassure many more. Sterling Holdings had chosen not to cover up, but to stand tall. After the town hall, I received a text from her. It was a single, venomous line. "You are a cruel woman." I didn't reply. I had already said everything I needed to say with my actions. That afternoon, my lawyer called with an update. "Catherine, the SEC has issued a formal notice of investigation. Several individuals are being called in for further questioning. The case will be long, but the direction is clear. It's no any one." I nodded, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I knew the road ahead was still long, filled with scrutiny and challenges, but at least I was no longer standing in the dark. That night, I stood on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle below. The wind was gentle, carrying a chill. I realized some losses are unavoidable, but some things can only be reclaimed when you are willing to pay the price. Somewhere, an old chapter was closing, and I knew a new one was waiting, harsher, perhaps, but also more real. The next day, the city woke to a different rhythm. I could feel it the moment I stepped outside. The morning papers were thicker, the headlines bold. The language was cautious, but any reader could understand that Sterling Holdings was in the midst of a crisis. I didn't hide. I didn't try to obscure the truth. I chose to walk directly into the heart of the storm. At the office, the atmosphere was tense. Employees still greeted me politely, but their eyes held a new layer of emotion, a mixture of anxiety and expectation. They were looking at me as someone standing on the precipice of the company's survival. Leo followed me into a small meeting room. "Catherine, the banks have been calling non-stop. They want to know our short-term plan." I placed my briefcase on the table. "They're worried about risk. That's normal." Leo lowered his voice. "One bank subtly suggested that if you were to step down from the executive role, they would be more willing to extend our line of credit." I looked up. "They want a scapegoat in exchange for stability." "Essentially, yes." Leo nodded. I was silent for a second. "Tell them I am not stepping down, but I am prepared to offer a level of transparency greater than anyone before me." The meeting with the bankers took place late that morning. Each representative spoke in cautious, roundabout terms, but their message was the same. Is Sterling Holdings still trustworthy? When it was my turn, I didn't use a slideshow or charts. I spoke directly. Trust cannot be borrowed. It must be earned through accountability. I won't promise that we won't face difficulties. I will only promise that we will not hide, we will not bend the law, and we will not blame others. End quote. One of them asked, "Are you certain you can control the situation internally?" "No one can have absolute control over people," I replied, "but I can control our processes, and I will take full responsibility for my decisions." The meeting ended without any clear promises, but I knew they had at least listened to me with a different kind of respect. At noon, I received the official notice. Michael was formally suspended from all executive duties pending the outcome of the investigation. The document was dry and bureaucratic, but each word felt like the closing of a chapter in both our lives. I held the paper for a long time, feeling no joy, no relief, only a strange emptiness, like the aftermath of a great storm that leaves behind a gray, waterlogged landscape. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer. He looked at me intently. "Catherine, you've come this far. Have you considered an honorable exit strategy?" "Do you think I should?" I asked. He shook his head. No, but you should be prepared. Some things can't be saved, even when you've done nothing wrong. I smiled faintly. I'm not trying to save everything. I'm just trying to save what's left. On the way back, I stopped at a small, quiet cafe. I needed a few minutes for myself, away from the numbers, the documents, the scrutinizing eyes. I had just sat down when someone pulled out the chair opposite me. It was her, Sarah. She wasn't wearing heavy makeup, and her face looked tired. "Aren't you afraid to be seen with me?" she asked. "At this point," I replied, "what is there to be afraid of?" She gave a bitter smile. "You won. What more do you want?" I looked at her. "You think this is about winning and losing?" She frowned. "You got the company, you pushed Michael into this corner. If that's not winning, what is?" I shook my head. "No, this is the cost." She fell silent. I continued. "Do you know what disappointed me the most? It wasn't your existence. It was that he chose to exist with you through deceit." Her hands tightened into fists. "He loved me." I nodded. "Perhaps, but he loved himself more." She stood up, her voice trembling. "You think you're better than me?" I looked straight at her. "No. The only difference is that I don't use love as a shield for my mistakes." She said nothing more, turned, and walked away. I watched her go, no longer feeling anger, only a thin veil of sadness. That evening, I got a call from Michael. His voice was deeper than usual. "I'm sorry." I was silent. "I know this apology is too late," he continued, "but I still wanted to say it." "I hear you," I replied softly. He sighed. "I thought I was strong enough to carry everything, but I was wrong." I looked out the window. "Everyone is wrong sometimes, Michael. What matters is how you face it." A pause. "What will you do now?" "I will do my job," I answered, to the end. The call ended. I put down the phone, feeling as if I had just closed the final door between us. No resentment, no lingering attachments. That night, I sat drafting a corporate restructuring plan. Each word that appeared on the screen was not just a business strategy, but a commitment to myself. I knew that from now on, every decision I made would be scrutinized tenfold, but I also knew I had no other choice. As the clock neared midnight, I stopped and rubbed my forehead. Outside, the city had grown quieter. I realized that sometimes the choice isn't between right and wrong, but between taking responsibility and continuing to run. And I had made my choice. The first Monday of the new era, I walked into Sterling Holdings Tower with a strange sense of clarity. The open whispering had stopped, replaced by a collective, watchful silence. It was the silence of people waiting to see which way the ship would turn. I knew that after the storm, what mattered most wasn't how much you said, but who was still standing. The executive meeting began on time. I looked around the room. Some faces I had known for a decade, others for only a few months. A few chairs were empty. Those people had chosen to leave amid the chaos. No one blamed them. Everyone has their breaking point. I stood up, not needing a microphone. "Thank you for being here. I'll be brief." I paused, letting my gaze pass over each face. We are at the most difficult point in Sterling's history. I won't sugarcoat it, and I won't make empty promises. I only want to say one thing. From today forward, this company will operate on truth. Someone spoke up. "Catherine, what if the truth costs us clients?" I nodded. "Then we accept that loss. The clients who stay for transparency will be more loyal than the ones who stayed for deception." The room grew quiet. I continued. "I don't need all of you to trust me. I only need those who remain to be willing to do what is right, even when it is hard." The meeting ended earlier than expected. As people filed out, Leo stayed behind. He looked at me, a hint of hesitation in his eyes. "Catherine, a few of the department heads would like to speak with you privately." "Send them in," I said. 3 people entered, their expressions a mix of tension and resolve. The oldest spoke first. "Catherine, we've been with this company a long time. We just want to know if you're planning a complete overhaul." I shook my head. "No. I'm only replacing what is rotten." Another asked, "And who decides what's rotten?" I looked at him directly. "Data, process, and the law. Not feelings, not relationships. They exchanged a look. Finally, the first one said, "In that case, we're prepared to stay." I offered a small smile. "I appreciate that." That afternoon, I received a report from HR. Nearly 10% of the workforce had resigned in the past 2 weeks. The number was significant, but within my projections. I signed off on their departures quickly, with a directive to ensure they received their full benefits. Leaving with dignity was also a form of accountability. That evening, I went home early. The house was vast and so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. I brewed a pot of tea and sat on the sofa, for the first time in days allowing myself to do nothing at all. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. "Are you okay, honey?" I stared at the words, a lump forming in my throat. "I'm okay, Mom," she replied almost instantly. "I read the news. People are saying a lot of things. Don't let it get to you." I smiled. "I'm not sad, just tired." A moment later, another text arrived. "If you're tired, come home. There's always a hot meal waiting for you." I put the phone down, a wave of warmth washing over me. Some anchors don't need many words. You just need to know they're there. The next day, I went to the SEC office for a follow-up interview. This time, the meeting was shorter. They had enough data to connect the dots. As I was leaving, one of the agents told me, "Mrs. Sterling, you may be called in again, but rest assured, your role in this is very clear." I nodded. "I'm ready to cooperate." Stepping out of the building, the afternoon sun was bright in my eyes. I shielded them with my hand and took a deep breath, feeling as if I had just passed through a heavy, unyielding door. Back at the company, I signed off on the temporary appointments for several key positions. They weren't the familiar names associated with power, but the quiet, hard-working people who knew their jobs inside and out. Leo looked at the list, a little surprised. "You didn't choose any of the old guard. Seniority doesn't guarantee integrity," I replied. Leo nodded. "I understand." At the end of the week, I held a small, informal gathering for the staff. No speeches, just coffee and pastries in the break room. I wanted to see them not through reports, but through their own eyes. A young analyst asked me, "Catherine, were you ever scared?" I thought for a moment. "Yes. But being scared doesn't mean you stop." She smiled. "I think you're very strong." I shook my head. "No, I just chose not to run." End quote. I knew those simple words would travel faster than any official memo. Late that night, I received a text from Michael. It was brief. I told them everything. I stared at the screen for a long time. "I know." He texted again. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just hope you don't blame yourself." I typed slowly. "I don't blame myself. I'm just learning not to repeat the same mistakes." He didn't text again after that. A week passed. The major shocks began to subside. The company hadn't recovered, but it had stabilized. Those who stayed started working with a different attitude, more cautious, but also more genuine. I knew trust couldn't be rebuilt in a day, but at least the foundation was being laid anew. One Sunday night, I was in my office alone. I stood by the window, looking down at the thinning traffic. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about power or victory. I was thinking about the people who chose to stay and those who had left. Every choice had its price. I asked myself if I had any regrets. The answer came quickly. No. If I had to do it all over again, I would still choose this path. Not because it was easier, but because it allowed me to look at myself in the mirror every morning. Outside, the city was drifting off to sleep, and for the first time in weeks, I felt I might finally get a full night's rest. The days that followed passed more slowly than I expected. The relentless shocks were gone, replaced by a quiet, persistent ache. It was like the recovery period after major surgery, when the sharp pain has faded, leaving behind a dull throb that reminds you of the wound. I started my mornings with a new habit, walking through the departments before heading to my office. I wanted to see the real rhythm of the place, not the one summarized in reports. In the engineering department, young designers were debating quietly over a blueprint. They paused when they saw me, then resumed their conversation. I smiled. At least they still dared to argue. In the sales division, a team lead was patiently guiding a new hire. I overheard him say, "Closing a deal by breaking the rules doesn't count." A few months ago, such a statement would have been seen as rigid. Now, it was said naturally. The afternoon, my lawyer called. The next session with the investigators was scheduled for the following week. It would involve cross-examining new testimony. I read the notice, my heart calm. What was meant to come would come. That night, I went home earlier than usual. The house was the same, but it felt different. I no longer avoided the familiar corners, the places tied to memories that were now hard to name. I turned on the lights and opened a window, letting the breeze in. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Catherine, I'm a former employee from the planning department. I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" I replied. "For not blaming all of us. I know many leaders would have taken the easier route." I stared at the screen for a long time. "The person who did wrong is the one who is responsible. You should continue your work with peace of mind." I put the phone down, a quiet warmth spreading through me. Words like that didn't appear in the press, but they were what helped me believe I wasn't alone. The next day, I visited my parents. My mother looked me over from head to toe. "You've lost weight." "I'm fine, Mom," I smiled. My father put down his newspaper. He didn't say anything, just looked at me for a long time. As I got up to help my mother in the kitchen, he finally spoke. "If you did the right thing, you have nothing to fear." His simple words made me turn away to hide my emotion. I knew they didn't understand everything I was facing, but they chose to stand with me in the most fundamental way. Returning to the city, I dove back into work. The restructuring began to show tangible results. A few smaller projects were halted, but cash flow stabilized. The team was leaner but more efficient. In one meeting, someone asked, "Catherine, if we have the chance to expand again, what will be your priority?" I answered without thinking, "The right people, not the right connections." At the end of the week, I received a handwritten letter. It was from Michael, sent from the detention center. His familiar handwriting was shakier now. He wrote that he accepted all consequences and hoped that what happened wouldn't harden my heart. I folded the letter. I didn't reply. For some relationships, when they reach their end, words are no longer necessary. That night, I had a strange dream. I was standing in a room full of mirrors. Each one reflected a different version of me, one crying, one angry, one cold and distant. But in the center of the room was a single, clear mirror reflecting me as I was now, standing tall, not looking away. I woke up as the sun was rising, feeling unusually light. The scars were forming. They didn't bleed, but they reminded me of what I had survived. It was these scars that made me more cautious, but not more fearful. I understood the road ahead was still long, but I had learned how to stand firm, not by pretending to be strong, but by accepting my own vulnerability. The final month of the year arrived quietly. The storms had passed, and the sun was gentle. The city was in a transitional season, everything slowing down a beat. I stood by my office window, watching the trees begin to change color, feeling a profound sense of peace. After everything, this calm wasn't emptiness. It was the result of no longer having to hide or run from anything. That morning, my lawyer called, his voice clear and formal. "Catherine, the final report is out. The investigation is complete. Michael and the other involved parties will be indicted based on the evidence. Your role has been officially cleared of any wrongdoing, and your cooperation was noted as instrumental in resolving the case." I closed my eyes for a second, not in celebration, but in closure. "Thank you." I hung up and sat in the silence. There was no triumphant feeling, just a period placed at the end of a long, exhausting sentence. The legal chapter was over. The rest was life. I called a brief meeting with the team that had stayed with me. "The official conclusion has been reached," I told them. "Today, we formally close the chapter on this crisis. Sterling Holdings will be held accountable to its future." That evening, I went home and cleared out my old study. I threw away stacks of files but kept one small, worn notebook. Inside were my hurried notes from the chaotic period, questions, doubts, moments of weakness. I flipped to the first page. In my own handwriting, it read, "If you have to choose, choose the truth." I closed the book and put it in a drawer, not to forget, but to remember. The next day, for the first time in years, I took a day off. I drove out of the city to a quiet park, took off my shoes, and felt the grass beneath my feet. I thought about the marriage that was over. No anger, no regret. It was simply a road I had walked to its end. That afternoon, I received a final text from Michael, relayed through his lawyer. A single line, "I wish you peace." I didn't reply, but I gave a small nod, a final, silent farewell. Returning to the city, I stopped by the office that night. The building was lit, the atmosphere productive. Leo met me in the hall. "I heard you took a day off." I smiled, trying to see what it's like to be a normal person. "You deserve it," he said. "No one deserves that kind of pressure." I corrected him gently. "Some people just choose to carry it." End quote. The following week, I announced the plan for the new year. No grand ambitions, no loud slogans, just steady, solid steps. I concluded, I can't promise we won't stumble, but I can promise that if we do, we will get back up with integrity. The applause was not loud, but it was unified and strong. That night, I stood on the balcony one last time, looking at the city lights. I wasn't thinking about the past or worrying about the future. I was just breathing, fully present in the moment. One circle had closed, not to end, but to begin another wiser and more real. And I walked forward, carrying not a burden, but a lesson. Dear listeners who have accompanied me until the end of my story, how did you find today's tale? I'm curious about the impression it has left in your hearts and the thoughts it has sparked in you. Please feel free to share your impressions and opinions in the comments. I will carefully read each of them. The likes and subscriptions you give me are the greatest source of strength and motivation for creating better stories in the future. Please don't forget to do so. I sincerely wish that your life is always filled with happiness and good fortune, and that the warm light in your hearts never fades.